y'all. Good to be here. I'm Melissa Cerezo. I will be your moderator for this panel. We'll just wait for some folks to jump in. I want to give a big shout out to SVBC staff who've been phenomenal at this summit, just seamlessly teleporting everyone in and out and making this experience really enriching. So thank you. All right, we're
all that practice really paid off, you know?
It does feel like teleportation.
Time travel. Yay, it's so good to see your beautiful faces because then you're going to turn them off soon. But in the meantime, let's get started. So my name is Melissa Cerezo. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a queer, Filipino American, land use transportation planner, SVBC board member. I'm a mama. I am a bike commuter and joyrider. And I am happy to be here. I'm happy to see you all joining us on day 2 to talk about this really important topic of our 5 E's and the values that we're bringing to active transportation. So the traditional 5 E's framework, evaluation, education, encouragement, engineering, and enforcement, these have really shaped our profession for quite some time. But really, how successful and relevant have they been at serving and dignifying all active transportation users, and particularly the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color? And this panel is going to take a hard look at those traditional E's, a real close examination of enforcement, some new E's, equity and empathy. And as we heard in the earlier plenary and in the opening remarks from Tox Omashek, we are in the wake of 3 pandemics, of COVID, economic disparities, and the need for the movement of Black lives. So we're all being called in fact, to examine our role and relationship to structural oppressions, and specifically racism, and the extent to which we're advancing racial equity or exacerbating racial inequity. So we invite you to lean into this brave space this morning. So let's give you a picture of our time today. We're going to start with a poll, get you all engaged, and then I'll introduce my panelists, and then we'll jump back to the poll to look at our results. And then after that, we'll have our panelists engage in their presentations, and then we'll do, if we have time, do a time check. If we'll do another quick poll, and then we'll follow that with a Q&A. So let's get started with our first poll here. You've got it showing up. What kind of interaction do you have with police or law enforcement today in your transportation work? No interaction, no direct interaction, some interaction, regular interaction. You may be the police, or you don't know. So we'll give you a little bit of time there, and I will go ahead and move to introduce our speakers and panelists. So we have joining us Jonathan Yuen, they them pronouns, is a planner at Toole Design, dedicated to making our cities livable, enjoyable, and safe for all. They're a GIS data analyst and designer, working on projects crossing between the public and private sectors, and negotiating sometimes conflicting needs between public agencies, community members, and other stakeholders. Our following presenter will be Demi Espinoza, she, her pronouns. She's the daughter of working class Mexican immigrants, the youngest in a family of 10 children raised in Riverside, California. Demi brings 15 years of policy and organizing experience to racial equity, environmental justice, and transportation equity. Demi's the Senior Equity and Policy Manager for the Safe Routes National Partnership, where she works on active transportation issues throughout Southern California, and in particular centering issues in the Inland Empire counties of Riverside and San Bernardino. And lastly, we're joined by Heather Eastwood, she, her pronouns, is a community health planner at San Mateo County Health. Heather leads the transportation work at San Mateo County Health Policy and Planning Group, expanding opportunities for walking, biking, and public transportation access. Heather holds a PhD in city and regional planning with an emphasis on public health. All right, so we're gonna be, let's take a look at our polls here. So it looks like about good 35% of you have some interaction with the police or law enforcement. it's pretty good regular interaction, I would say, between some and regular interaction. So in a quarter view, no interaction at all. Okay, well, we really appreciate getting that snapshot. And now we'll move towards our presentations. We again invite you to engage in the chat space, the brave space, right? And also, you know, be mindful of the space that you're taking. Take space, make space. So with that, let's start with Jonathan. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I think I have control of the screen now, so I guess I'll just get started. To kick off today's equity session, I'm going to spend a few minutes introducing the ease of transportation. Depending on who you ask, there's 3 or 5 or 6, but I'm going to talk about how these E's have worked against us to create some of the worst parts of our sprawling, car-centric, and honestly pretty racist transportation system today. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Jonathan. I'm a planner in Toole Design's Oakland office. Toole Design is a nationwide transportation planning firm. We do a lot of active transportation planning and design. I personally work on a lot of bike and ped master plans, especially with data, GIS, and more recently, some virtual engagement. So let's get started. A lot of you know this already, but we'll recap. What are the E's of transportation? In today's practice, I think we most commonly see these 5: engineering, education, enforcement, encouragement, and evaluation. Engineering is the design, operation, and management of our roadway system, and other transportation systems can range from a nationwide interstate plan to the timing of a single signal. While engineering is about the built environment, education seeks to influence how we as road users behave and interact with that environment. We educate each other that certain behaviors are acceptable, like wearing a seatbelt, staying in the crosswalk, or looking for bikes before you open the door to avoid hitting them. And enforcement is how we hold people to those acceptable behaviors. A traffic cop or a camera might discourage people from speeding or running red lights. So encouragement and evaluation are also really important. Encouragement places a positive value on certain parts of our transportation systems, like bike plans might talk about building a bike culture, or schools might have bike rodeos. Those are all encouragement. Evaluation is about data collection and evaluating the effectiveness of other programs. But today I'm just going to focus on the first 3 E's here: engineering, education, and enforcement. They have a history nearly 100 years long, and they're integral to a shift from this, where most city streets were crowded with people and cars driving at slower, safer speeds, to this. And the truth is that these 3 E's are inseparable from the rise of the automobile. The first MUTCD in 1935 emphasized using engineering, education, and enforcement to manage congestion and safety. But to be honest, it hasn't really worked. So the question is why? Aren't these 3 E's supposed to be working together to guide the built environment and to guide our behavior to make things better? So let's take a look at what we've used these 3 E's to accomplish. We live in a country where engineers design roads that are, quote, up to code, but look like this photo on the left. This is in San Jose, where Interstate 280 and Highway 87 meet. And at multiple points in our history, we've had people in the highest ranks of government say, oh yeah, we need that everywhere. And this is the result. Our car-centric design practices have destroyed our urban fabric towards the goal of faster travel and being farther away from your neighbor. At some point in that 100-year process, we came up with rules to make driving easier. So we started educating people. When you're walking on the street, you have to stay on the sidewalk, and you can only cross where the lines are. You have to press this button though to ask permission first. Oh, wait, you can't do that either. We chose not to install sidewalks or crosswalks. We actually don't see this a lot in the Bay Area, but in most of the country, this is everywhere. To me, this one is the worst. Our transportation systems intentionally hurt people who have not really had it good in our history. Red line neighborhoods, communities of color, low-income communities, they get the worst of it, whether it's asthma, car crashes, or just like really long commutes. Something really interesting, or something that I find interesting, in almost every large coastal city in this country, we've tried to demolish a Chinatown to build a freeway. This one is about Oakland, where I am. So even though a quarter of residents are Black in Oakland, 60% of bicycle stops by police are stopping Black men. I'll let you think about that for a minute, since I'll come back to this. But so anyways, these 3 E's, engineering, education, and enforcement, they're not inherently bad. They're tools that honestly have furthered some bad intentions. What we need are new values. So instead of following the code book to a T, why don't we think more about the engineer's code of ethics to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public? California is moving away from LOS and shifting our goals towards minimizing bad impacts, but more broadly, we still place the burden of responsibility on the user. NHTSA says that 94% of traffic crashes, almost all traffic crashes, are due to human error. So we're dodging responsibility for 30 to 40,000 deaths a year. Some programs like Vision Zero are changing that, and cities are saying, you know, we have to use these E's, these tools, to meet other goals of not letting people die on our streets. For education, instead of telling people how to behave, what if we built our systems with empathy around something that works for the user? This is an engagement strategy we used with the San Jose Better Bike Plan, and we find ourselves coming back to this a lot, is we try to meet people where they're at. Engagement, that's another E. It's a relatively new aspect of transportation planning, and there's lots of room for an experimentation and improvement. So instead of asking people to come to City Hall for a stuffy workshop, we try to go to them. We actually pay community-based organizations like Vivo to spend time telling us what they want to see on San Jose streets. So the third problematic E, this one we're hoping to have more conversation on today. This is the same statistic as earlier about police stops in Oakland. And America has a complicated and messed up relationship with its police. It's not just police stops, it's about the 500,000 Black men who have been incarcerated by this justice system that pits everybody against Black folks. And I don't think it's that we don't need enforcement. I think it's that enforcement, the way it works right now, isn't working for us. It's not saving lives, it's not making transportation better. And why should our Black folks be afraid that a traffic stop might end up with them being killed? Not every DOT or public works department is ready to break up with police, and a lot of agencies want to include equity as a priority. So it's a slow process, but I think there's a lot of change happening. I think I'm running out of time, but I'll try to wrap this up quickly. Oakland is very conscious about equity and has been trying to create a feeling of inclusion for our Black community. And this is a project on 14th Street near downtown. And Toole Design has been supporting this project for, I think, the past year or so. I think it's a great example of equity at a lot of different stages of a transportation project. So that's all I have time for, I think. And that's all on the new E's of transportation. I'll just close by saying that I'm really excited to see our transportation practice change and grow. There's not a better time than now to talk about equity. white people, and government is full of white people, love talking about equity, and it's time. So I'll hand it off.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, we're going to transition to Demi Espinosa's presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Demi Espinosa. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Equity and Policy Manager from Safe Routes Partnership. I'm calling in today from traditional and unceded Tongva territory, also known as Los Angeles, California, and I'm specifically calling from my kitchen, which is the most important room of the house. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our recent decision to drop enforcement from the Safe Routes to School framework. So you can go ahead and click the next slide. So, you know, I want to talk a little bit about why Safe Routes to School is important, the history of the Safe Routes to School ease, and traditional role that the police has played in the programming, why it's problematic, and some alternatives. You know, please expect to hear my own personal experience, and I'm going to reflect the values of Safe Routes Partnership. I ask that you don't expect we have all the answers. We're currently developing a toolkit with the help of local practitioners, as well as Black-led organizations, to really kind of address how enforcement has played a role in Safe Routes to School. So you can go ahead and click the next slide. This is some of our organizational expertise. So we've done community engagement, land use, school siting, active transportation and policy programs. But you know, we are a national nonprofit, and we work to advance safe walking and biking to and from schools. I particularly work in California, and I work in the Inland Empire, Riverside, and San Bernardino County, as well as other areas of Southern California. So some examples that I will use today will be specific to Southern California, but I think could be applied in both an urban and rural context. Next slide. So every time I do a presentation on Safe Routes programming, I really love to show this slide because I think it really grounds us in why this work is important and is very critical, particularly that Safe Routes to School programming is not equitable. In fact, children killed while walking, there's a disproportionate amount of Black students who are twice as likely to be killed walking to and from school, as well as Latinx students. And you know, we know this from narratives on the ground as well as data that communities with sidewalks tend to be in high incomes. And in fact, that's 90% of affluent neighborhoods have the infrastructure to walk and bike safely. Next slide. So the previous speaker, Jonathan, did a really amazing job talking about the 5 E's. And I'll just quickly emphasize education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and engineering have been historically the 5 E's that have been the organizational framework that have really helped launch programs locally. They act as the universal checklist for practitioners to use to define a Safe Routes to School initiative. It wasn't actually until 2015 that they added equity, and we added equity to our organizational framework, because we really wanted to focus on creating healthy, thriving communities for all ages, races, ethnicities, incomes, and abilities. But even more importantly, we wanted to, you know, hold jurisdictions accountable to prioritize in their methodology the schools and communities who have seen decades of a disinvestment in non-infrastructure programs and infrastructure programs. So, you know, that's kind of the framework that I approach the E in equity, is that it really kind of sets jurisdictions up to prioritize the schools that haven't, you know, gotten the resources that others have. And, you know, this really acts as not only a framework for practitioners, but really acts as an encouragement for parents and students to get involved in Safe Routes to School. You know, so I've definitely seen the evolution of the program locally on the ground. This is the photo on the right is from a Walk to School Day and Clean Air Day event in Muscoy, a rural community, which I'll reference quite a bit through the presentation. Next slide. So the role of police in safe routes to school, what has that been? Traditionally, police have been used for things like supporting temporary demonstration projects for safe routes to school, walk to school day. They've been invited to help co-host Walking Wednesdays, bike rodeos, but most notably, enforcement of police have been used for monitoring traffic laws and ensuring speed reduction laws are abided by drivers. And number two, the role of police in schools have also been safety resource officers, school police. And so, this is not typically seen in elementary, but is very much seen in junior high and high school. One example, one of the largest school budgets in the country is LAUSD, with a police school budget of $7 million, which was actually recently have seen, because of the work of advocates, their budget has been cut 25 million. So that's a huge victory for advocates, particularly, to ensure that Black Lives Matter in school. But the LAUSD has actually seen 350 sworn police officers. So there's quite a bit of police presence that aid in things like random searches that target Black and brown students, and it was really dehumanizing in the educational space. But I wanted to bring up these two examples of how police have played a role in safe routes to school. Next slide. So what's the problem with police in schools? Well, for one, police in schools exacerbates inequities from decades of disinvestment of both social and built environment infrastructure. So, we've seen a lot of jurisdictions call upon police when there isn't things like stop signs, crosswalks, speed reduction measures as a way to kind of, keep traffic laws. And so, there's a lot of concerns that we have around that, particularly around the fact that history has shown the impact of harm and structural racism that has had on Black, Indigenous communities of color through explicit planning processes, much like Jonathan talked about in terms of redlining. And the other big one is, racial profiling. Jonathan talked about a slide in Oakland, but we actually have seen that as well in Southern California and the regions I work in, that Black drivers are disproportionately stopped by police and have had deadly consequences. So not only is school police harmful to communities of color, but it really doesn't actually change driver behavior. We have research showing that it changes driver behavior in the short term, but long term, it doesn't have a lot of effects on whether drivers abide by traffic laws. And, in short, it really does not make communities safer. For example, we work in Muscoy, the rural area in San Bernardino County, which is the picture on the right. We did a Safe Routes to School action plan, and parents explicitly shared their concerns around police being a part of Walking Wednesday because they have explicitly shared concerns that a lot of parent drivers do not have driver's license, might be undocumented, and so the risk of being stopped is, could really mean a life or death situation. Next slide. So as we're moving away from contracts with police, what are some alternatives to policing and safe routes to school? Well, for example, we really want to elevate the opportunity to partner and showcase the leadership of parents and volunteers. So I mentioned that Walking Wednesdays are often supported by police, but that very much could be a role that volunteers take on and get paid for. So we can really, instead of investing in police to do some of these activities, really support local economies of parents and volunteers. The other opportunity is to invest in educational programs. So our Metropolitan Planning Organization, SCAG, which some of you might be familiar with, operates an educational program called Go Human that personalizes traffic safety messages. And there's a picture on the right of one that we worked with. And it's also an opportunity to divest from, frankly, funding streams that are harmful, like Office of Traffic Safety that uses ticketings and fines to fund Safe Routes to School programs. Well, now is the opportunity to be more creative of how we fund programs that are not problematic for communities of color and BIPOC communities. And next slide. And the biggest point I want to emphasize too is now is an opportunity to focus on built environmental infrastructure changes. So what are the remedies to really address long-term speed reduction measures? We heard from communities that we work with in Musquoy that they want things like speed bumps, speed tables, flashing beacons. Those are the things that are going to address driver behavior and actually make communities safer, not police. It's also an opportunity to support community resiliency and work with community-based organizations. And lastly, most importantly, moving from police supports Black Lives Matter in school. And that's one of the biggest messages I want to underscore in this presentation. And I think I'm wrapping up. Next slide. We are looking to actually replace enforcement with engagement and looking for meaningful opportunities to engage community and having some ownership and vision of what the Safe Routes to School project program looks like in their community. And next slide. There's some resources I'm happy to share. Next slide. And please, we're going to have more resources to come. We're developing a toolkit and we really need your help. So please feel free to reach out, and we'd love to hear how Safe Routes to School is working in your own communities. Next slide. And next slide. And thank you. So happy to take questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Demi. I just want to remind our panelists to please turn on your cameras so that we can have a view of you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Heather Eastwood. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Let me just see if I have control of this. I don't know if I do. How do I advance the slides from my end? I'm so sorry.
I think Deanna is going to help us with that.
Oh,
so you'll just have to indicate it verbally.
Heather,
Gotcha.
can you hear me?
Yes.
When you go to the left bottom of the screen, you'll get some arrows.
I don't see the arrow. Oh, it worked.
Use your key. Yeah, use your arrow keys maybe. Okay.
Sorry about that, everyone. We actually did have a trial run. I just forgot. So good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Eastwood. I'm a community health planner with San Mateo County Health Department. And so today I'm going to talk about how to incorporate equity, or really lead with equity, in active transportation plans, programs, and projects. So just a little bit about where I work. I work at San Mateo County Health Department in policy and planning, and I work under an initiative that's called Get Healthy San Mateo County. So our mission is to support policy change to prevent disease and ensure everyone has equitable opportunities to live a long and healthy life. And just to frame our work a little bit, so we work from a place-based prevention, and what this really means is we acknowledge that where you live, work, and play, all of these environments really shape health outcomes, and opportunities to live a healthy life. And we work from advancing health equity. So this is also acknowledging that not everyone has the same opportunities to live a healthy life. And we work from a collaborative and partnership perspective. So we work a lot with cities, other county agencies, and nonprofit groups to achieve our mission and goals. Okay, so in my work, I lead our active transportation and our public transportation access work in policy and planning. And so active transportation and public transportation are some of the healthiest and most cost affordable methods for getting around. So, So what we're looking at is low income and communities of color have really been sort of left out of investment for infrastructure for active and public transportation options. But when we look at these areas, these are actually the neighborhoods that utilize these services or infrastructure the most. And this chart is showing that within San Mateo County, individuals that are higher earners are actually more likely to drive on their own more than other income earners, even though these people are the ones that are most likely to utilize the services. And this holds true across the county in every place except for two in San Mateo County, which are Hillsborough and Woodside, which are very affluent communities already, and higher income earners there are more likely to walk and bike. So given our current pandemic situation, we are really expecting more people to be utilizing walking and biking, either for leisure, exercise, or as an alternative to the idea that the buses are really cutting their lines. They aren't running as frequently. So we're expecting to see an increase in people walking and biking. And at the county, we would really like to get in front of this, what we consider to be a trend that's going to start, to make sure that any new infrastructure or any new plans that come up, that we're really embedding equity in the process for identifying where these projects are going to happen. So we want to look at then, how do we include equity? What does that mean to lead with it? So what is equity? So from our standpoint, equity is really just giving people the resources that they need to be successful. And this can actually mean an unequal distribution of resources to achieve parity based on the fact that resources have not historically been equally distributed. So the health connection. Walking and biking, it's pretty obvious the physical, mental, social benefits, but there's an additional benefit that we see from the idea of environmental justice. So looking at low income and communities of color as being the places that really host the burden of toxic facilities, of pollution, and that healthy transportation options can really help mitigate traffic, it can ease congestion, this can improve overall air quality, and that can all really help mitigate the effects from climate change as well. So what do we mean? So when we're starting to plan for health equity, we have two main ways that we're starting from. So applying a health equity framework throughout the entire planning process. And what this can really mean is starting with the definition of health equity or a definition of equity that you're going to be using, creating indicators and performance measures, and using a data-driven approach to really identify areas that are in the highest need. And then the second area of empowering civic participation in communities of color. So what this really means is engaging communities from culturally and linguistically appropriate methods for engagement and avoiding interventions that are have a high financial or legal burden on community residents. Using cross-sector collaborations, so working with other government agencies, making sure we're bringing in health and public works, as well as community-based organizations, and empowering a community advisory group to make sure that the resident perspective is part of the entire planning process, and to commit to transparency and accountability throughout the entire process. So not just when the plan designs have been drawn up, but even before then when the plan designs are being created. And so when the first area that I was speaking about, using a data-driven approach. So here are some examples of equity criteria, and all of these have publicly available data sources that anyone can access. So these are some main buckets of areas we could look at. So transit dependence, so look at who has access to cars in the first place. Residents' age, so this will define like who is even able to get around. Disability status, and for socioeconomic factors. You know, starting with household income and poverty are really good measures, but there are other things we could look at as well. So commute mode and commute time, knowing that lower income communities have longer commute times than higher earners. Household income and poverty. So currently 200% of the federal poverty level in the Bay Area is about $50,000 for a family of 4. So that's why we double it to say 200, because even when you double it, you still only get to about $50,000. And when we're working with schools, looking at free and reduced lunch eligibility and English language learners. For the displacement risk, so this is looking at which areas are currently at risk for displacement and gentrification. So this is always a concern when we're considering where we're going to start investing. Environmental exposure, so this is communities that have a high pollution burden through toxic facilities, through air pollution, through cars. Transportation finance, so this is the idea of looking at different budgets. So even if you have a city, a local, like a county, a state, or the federal transportation budget, and look at which shares of those budgets are going to which modes of transportation. And then number 6 is, these are just 2 potential resources for you. So we have our Get Healthy data portal, which is part of Get Healthy San Mateo. And here we have a lot of these indicators already mapped out by census tract and city for the county. And we update this every year. And our Get Healthy toolkit has a lot of information in there. And it goes into some details about public engagement, which if you heard my colleague Erica, she presented on that yesterday. So this is just an example of work we did with the Office of Education in San Mateo County. So Office of Education runs their Safe Routes to School program, and we worked with them to try to identify schools for investment, with the acknowledgement that Safe Routes to School funding has been decreasing over the past few years. So we wanted to know which schools should we target or would really benefit from Safe Routes to School programming. So we wanted to identify schools that were located in areas of high poverty and high bike ped collisions. So we defined high poverty as at least 30% of the residents were living below 200% of the federal poverty level, which then was about 48,000 for a family of 4. And schools that also were in the top 85th percentile of bike ped collisions that were occurring within a quarter mile of schools. So using these 2 indicators, there were 15 schools in the county that met both criteria. And so what we did next was we started reaching out to the schools. We created large convenings with school staff, with city staff, county staff, public works, and we brought everyone together to start discussing what are the challenges at these schools and what were the barriers to addressing these challenges. From there, we were successful in securing some grants. Some of them were from the Office of Traffic Safety, and we use that money to conduct walk audits within the area. And we are currently using those walk audits to apply for additional funding going forward to address the issues that we identified, and to also make sure that those walk audits are included in larger either county transportation plans so that they can also be addressed in the future. So these are just some other resources, how you can connect with us. This will be available. And this is my personal information if you have any questions following up with this.
All right, thank you so much, Heather. I'll invite actually the panelists to all pop in their contact information into the group chat so that we can share that out. We did have the thought of doing a second poll, but as we are running out of time here, we've got about 10 minutes. We want to be able to honor the conversation that our audience would like to have with y'all. So let's get started with Q&A. Well, first out, I just wanted to really support the panelists in really helping us frame these issues around the 5 E's, being very intentional about how these have created, problematized the way that we have been centering these values, and really looking towards equity now as a prioritization tool, being data-driven about it, really looking at enforcement as a value being extremely fraught and needing to question whether this is really serving us all. And so, with that, I think we've got a number of questions that have populated in the chat, and I want to get to them. So in terms of let's say, let's hit some of the transportation lens resources that that Jonathan was alluding to in their presentation. We heard from Nayantara. Are there resources available that look at transportation that way so that we can plan better?
I would say absolutely. I think a lot of cities and a lot of nationwide agencies are, maybe not agencies, but organizations are looking to change their practice. And I think just off the top of my head, there's a couple of design and planning resources that are trying to focus on active transportation users and vulnerable users rather than just planning and designing for the automobile. One example, I think this might answer another question that came up. Toole Design is working on a 2020 version of the AASHTO bicycle design guide. And there's a lot of focus there on making the experience better for bicyclists in particular, rather than as kind of an afterthought in a car-focused transportation system.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, we'll move to a question I think is for Demi here. What would you say to parents who ask for increased police presence along school routes to enforce traffic safety in light of dropping enforcement? How do you all look at automated enforcement potentially taking over for traditional traffic enforcement?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that we've gotten a couple times. You know, and when we do focus groups and we work with community members who are driving the vision of the campaign, and I'm thinking specifically of Musqueam, a rural area, and a couple others, they, you know, have concerns about traffic safety, and there's been some division. There's some parents that want police, and you know, quite a bit of majority don't. But we really kind of go underneath of what the reasoning is, and it's always around speed reduction. It's always around, well, there's cars, you know, that don't abide by traffic safety or traffic laws around the school, and that's really for us an infrastructure opportunity. And I think, you know, we've really pushed the County of San Bernardino Public Works to actually consider what are the underlying concerns and fears around, you know, why parents don't feel safe for their children to walk and bike. And it's literally the speed reduction. So, you know, rather than have enforcement that is going to ticket, you know, community members and actually tax community members, why not, you know, use this opportunity to make some really serious changes to the built environment that have been, you know, something that's been really needed for decades. They don't have any sidewalks, they don't have any stop signs. And then I also just want to make quickly this point is that we hear a lot of parents say, well, we want police to patrol because there's quite a bit of drug and alcohol paraphernalia around school, and we're concerned about our students coming into contact with that. That exposes another need for the county to do some investment in drug and alcohol prevention, you know, and mental health services and social infrastructure investment, not police, not. So we use those opportunities to kind of really address what's the underlying problem rather than criminalize community members. So that's what we've been doing, is really emphasizing what investments we can bring to the community rather than, you know, burdens that we can bring to the community, which happens when enforcement is brought into a school environment.
Thank you. I think that the next question we could ask here is really to all the panelists. What would it take to change the 5 E's to the 3 E's that were proposed by Jonathan? And how can folks in this space help?
I can start off the answer, and I'm just going to say that maybe the goal isn't to replace those E's, but to instill these values in the application of them, because we still need engineering and we still need education, and maybe in a different way, we still need enforcement. And I think a good example is a lot of cities are looking to temper their current enforcement practices. Some transportation agencies are trying to take back that enforcement wing from the police department, like in Berkeley as a local example, or in New York, where transportation enforcement used to be part of MTA, but for some reason switched to the police department.
I would add that, so for the health system, before equity was really brought in as an additional E, this is something that we've been including for years. And we've always made it a point to lead with equity. So instead of having equity as its own standalone piece, like the other E's, to make sure that equity is infused in every one of these areas. So I think that we could continue to do that and also bring in the other E's that Jonathan mentioned as well. So like ethics. Ethics should be in everything. So I think what it takes to do it is we just do it.
Demi, did you want to offer anything?
No, I'm just really excited about the empathy and ethics. I mean, those two E's are new to me, and I think could be applied not just for safe routes to school, but all kinds of land use planning. And so excited to, collaborate with others who are also interested in making sure that planning decisions are ethical and, addressing root causes of disparities and comorbidities. And so, yeah, excited to see how that those two E's come to be.
Awesome. Okay, let's shift to a funding question that we heard about here. How are safe routes to school implementers navigating that some of our state program funding comes through police departments? Are you negotiating no armed or police presence in schools, engagement standards if they are on site, or are you dropping these contracts? I guess that's a Demi question if it's more specifically about safe routes.
Sure. I think that's such an important question and discussion to have. Quite a bit of safe routes to school programs do come from ticketings and fines, which, to me is a regressive source of a funding stream, because we're ticketing the very communities that we're trying to plan for and create these safe routes to school programs. So to me, that doesn't make sense. And so I'd rather elevate the programs that are progressive and really helping communities. And so I think, one good example of that is working with CBOs, community-based organizations, as well as your MPO. So, we have a really great relationship with SCAG that does an educational campaign called Go Human, which targets driver behavior. And so emphasizing programs like that and building partnerships like that could be translated to safe routes to school programs, walking Wednesdays, clean air days. Like there's so many opportunities to, work in those spaces as opposed to kind of regressive funding streams. And so, I do think that ending contracts with police is the right and ethical, course of action for school administrators and practitioners to implement. And I think, I'm really excited to hear about these conversations about cutting police budgets and reinvesting in community.
Thank you. Well, maybe we have one more. We have a second here to address one more question that came up about finance specifically. I think this one's for Heather. How do you use transportation finance data in cities to alter which modes are financed?
So I don't think we've utilized the data to impact any of our programs or policy changes, but it's something that we're currently, it's something we're monitoring, and it's something that we work with other nonprofit agencies to look at as well. And we use that to advocate for policies for increased funding for active transportation funding. We can compare it to say, this is the share of the budget that's going to these sources. This is how many people use these resources, and these are the communities that use these resources, to make the arguments of why we should increase that share. It's always very low, you know, if we have like an entire tax that's going to be levied, and looking at the breakdown, the bulk of it is always going to go to the roads, but we can at least use this to get a couple extra percentage points there every time we have the opportunity.
Okay. Well, to respect your time and give folks some breathing space before the next panel, I want to thank our panelists today for joining us on this discussion about the values that we bring to active transportation. We invite all of you to continue this really critical view into the kinds of values and framework that we use, and to come back to equity, come back to ethics regularly in our work, and continue to question that. So with that, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the Summit Day 2.